Hello and welcome. With us today is Jose Manuel Diokno. He is one of our country's most prominent lawyers, the Dean of De La Salle Law School, and a former team leader of the prosecution team during the Estrada impeachment trial. Welcome to Talk Thursday, Chel. Chel, dramatic developments. We now have the Ombudsman and the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court saying they will testify. What do you make of what's happened so far?
That's very interesting. From a legal perspective, many of us are in a quandary what the defense is trying to do. It's very risky to call a hostile witness, even just one of them. To call 10 hostile witnesses, to me, is almost like legal suicide. And I'm not exactly sure what the strategy of the defense here is. The problem with calling a hostile witness is you have no control over what they will say. And by characterizing them as hostile, you already know that they are not for you. That means that when they are cross-examined by the prosecution could have a field day. They could easily get admissions from the witnesses that otherwise they wouldn't be able to get.
If this is legal suicide, what is the defense after?
I'm not sure. It could be possibly a prelude for them to raise that issue before the Supreme Court. You see, there's that pending petition about the foreign currency deposits.
Correct.
They may be using this as a ploy in order to get testimony about the cases filed in the Ombudsman, in order not only to stop the presentation of the foreign currency evidence in the impeachment, but possibly even to stop the Ombudsman cases.
But as it stands right now, can the Ombudsman's investigation be used in the impeachment trial?
Well, it's the defense that called the Ombudsman to the stand, so they have no choice now. Anything that the Ombudswoman says on the witness stand is their evidence, whether they like it or not.
How do you put this together? Because the Supreme Court and the Senate ruled against using dollar deposits in the impeachment earlier,
well,
correct?
There's a TRO only, as far as I know, and no final judgment yet.
The TRO is there. So now that TRO has been pushed aside by this development, is that correct?
It's possible that they may ask for a new restraining order on the basis of these disclosures. I wouldn't want to put myself in the seat of the defense, but they're in a difficult situation now.
Give us scenarios. What can we expect? What do you see happening on Monday?
I see a lot that's going to happen on Monday. When each of these hostile witnesses is presented, there is no obligation yet on the part of the impeachment court to recognize them as hostile, so that initially at least the defense will have to treat them as friendly witnesses, meaning that they can only ask them open-ended questions. If they are allowed to be treated as hostile witnesses, that's the only time that the defense can start cross-examining them. Now, even if that happens, when they're finished with their presentation, the witness now will be passed to the prosecution. And when the prosecution questions them, they can cross-examine. So for the prosecutor, it's like putting words in the mouth of the witness, and the witness will simply have to say yes or no. That is the biggest problem with calling a hostile witness. That's why in trial practice, as much as possible, we avoid it. This is very, very risky.
What kind of woman is the Ombudsman, Conchita Carpio Morales?
I think she's a fighter. And I think if she's put on the witness stand, she will say what she has to say. And that is going to be beyond the control of the defense counsel. They cannot stop her in the middle of her testimony. Now, anything she says on direct examination, the prosecution now on cross can pursue, and they can expand and enlarge that testimony. Yes. So that's why I'm saying that it's almost a form of legal suicide.
What about the work this woman does? What's her track record show about the kind of work?
She has very good track record in the Supreme Court. Now, as Ombudsman, I think it's a bit too early to tell, because there's a very, very big challenge when you sit in that office. In the first place, you have to clean up the office itself first before you can really start doing things outside of the office, and that's one of the problems that she has to face.
She's a cousin of the man who's identified by Chief Justice Corona as his rival, Justice Carpio. It seems like it's turning personal it seems like the trial as a whole now, the defense is turning it personal. Is that the case, and what do we expect to happen?
I'm not sure. Perhaps one of their strategies is just to muddle the issues and perhaps make the people not too sure about the possible guilt of the Chief Justice. But, you know, in the end, the senators are going to look at this from two perspectives, really. One perspective is going to be the evidence presented in the trial, but then this is not purely a legal process. So you also have the political dimension, which is very hard to gauge.
Some people say that that Chief Justice Corona almost had he really had to testify if there was any chance at all of getting an acquittal. Is that correct?
Yes. At this point, it's going to be very difficult for him not to say anything. And it's not just the senators, but the public themselves, I think, are waiting for him to speak. If he stands on his right to remain silent, there's a lot of implications and inferences that can be drawn from it, and he will not be able to address them. Whether he likes it or not, I think he'll have to take the witness stand.
And again, the implication from the defense has always been that this is a personal attack against the Chief Justice, and now you have his rival and the ombudsman, who is a relative of the rival, using their powers against him.
It remains to be seen whether he can prove that. It's easy to make that kind of allegation. I would want to see myself what evidence he has to support that.
Again, the head of the defense panel said that they would drag the president in, President Aquino in. What will this do?
I think they have already dragged the president in, and at this point I don't think it's going to have much of an impact. Maybe a little media spin, but that's all.
Carpio Morales, in the past, as ombudsman, when the case was about former President Arroyo, she actually said no, she didn't have enough evidence. That seems to show that for her to come out and actively say this, that she has strong evidence of $10 million.
Yes, I don't think she would go that far unless she were pretty sure of where she's coming from. Justice Morales has been known to be someone who doesn't do something just offhandedly, and she would have made sure that she has the basis for it.
Can she be intimidated by someone like Justice Cuevas?
I don't think so, and that would be an interesting confrontation between Justice Cuevas and Justice Morales.
Can you pull us out? What's at stake now, and how do you see it unfolding on Monday?
Well, the whole trial, the outcome of the entire trial could turn on what will happen next week. That's why this is probably the most crucial part of the impeachment process.
We're also joined on social media by people who are very interested and have been following the trial. So please, if you have questions, Chel Diokno is here to answer your questions on the trial. Let's pull it back broader again in terms of what these impeachment trials mean for the country. What's going to be decided here of conviction versus an acquittal?
Well, it's really a question of fitness for office, and the whole issue is whether the Chief Justice is fit to remain in office. So any decision will revolve around that, whether to remove him from office, or whether he'll remain. But you know, there are some really underlying issues here. Early on, the Chief Justice was talking about, oh, you're putting the judiciary on trial. In a way, the judiciary is on trial, but not in the way that the Chief Justice is projecting it. Why am I saying that? I am very concerned with the recent pronouncement of the Supreme Court that all the justices have supposedly submitted their salens, but nobody has access to it. So they are still maintaining the same 23-year-old rule that prohibits access by the media and the public. For me, if this impeachment whole thing is going to have any value, one of the things that should come out of it is more transparency on the part of the judiciary. I think it's very clear. If there were no impeachment complaint and no impeachment trial, the Chief Justice would probably never have come out publicly with the salen, which means that when you have a Supreme Court that hides its salens, then the rest of the judiciary can follow suit. And so you have an entire branch of government that is not accountable to the public. And yet these are members of government who are not elected. Yes. So the more so they should be transparent, the more their salens should be open to the public.
You're very familiar with the real state of the justice system. How would you describe it today?
Oh, the justice system is in terrible shape. It's not just sick the way I see it. It's pretty much dying, and unless fundamental changes are done now, it will never change.
Do you think these trials, the impeachment of the Chief Justice, what impact will it have on this judiciary?
I think even now it has had an impact. When I speak to members of the judiciary, they are themselves more aware of the Salen, but they're going to take their cue from the Supreme Court. So long as the Supreme Court will keep their own Salens concealed, then everybody else in the judiciary is going to follow suit.
Right now, they've opened it up a little bit more, at least. Not yet.
I think that remains to be seen. I wouldn't be as optimistic about that.
Wow. Let me take you back then to Monday, to what will happen on Monday. You said that this is, again, this could be legal suicide for them. It's going to be difficult. What would you, knowing both the Ombudsman and the Chief Justice, how will they be on the stand? I mean, what would you expect them to say?
I think the Justice Morales would come across as very credible and very sober. I don't think she would have any baggage to carry on the witness stand. On the other hand, the Chief Justice would probably have to calibrate his presentation when he does sit down, because from the way he's been talking in his public speeches, a lot of emotion will come out. And I don't know if that's going to be good for the defense or not.
Well, so far, when we've seen him in public, and he has actually, he's held a rally in front of the Supreme Court, he has been very emotional. It's almost like watching a politician rather than the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. This seems to be the way this Chief Justice has exercised his power.
Yes, but it's not going to be effective when it comes to the trial itself. I don't think taking that kind of an approach is going to work, because he will have to address point by point the documents and evidence presented by the prosecution.
What are the key evidence that the prosecution has now?
Well, basically, it revolves around Article 2. And all of the 17 witnesses who testified and all the documents they presented, he would have to address at least the high points of each of their testimonies.
If the Ombudsman's investigation has unearthed at least $10 million, he faces far worse than impeachment, doesn't he?
Yes, definitely.
What does this mean? I mean, it goes back to plunder, abuse.
Well,
could you tell us what this means?
It could give rise to a number of criminal prosecutions. Everything from violation of the Code of Conduct, the Public Act 6713, and violation of the anti-graft laws, among others. Ill-gotten wealth also.
The prosecution has pushed forward that
Yes.
it could go up to ill-gotten wealth. It also seems that the defense, at least from what the lawyers have said, that they will not go down. I mean, they'll go down swinging if they go down at all. How dirty can this get?
Oh, there's a backstory to this whole thing that I think the public isn't very much aware of. Because while on one level the senators are talking about the evidence, on another level I'm sure that both camps are counting votes.
Correct.
And they're trying to predict how many senators will vote for their side and how many will vote on the other side.
Where does it stand right now?
Now, one indication there is to see when the defense will terminate its evidence. Because if the defense, for example, will finish and say, we're done with all our witnesses next week, then I would say that they would only do that if they had some confidence that they'll get the votes. On the other hand, if the defense tries to prolong the case by presenting so many witnesses and evidence, that could be an indication that they're not confident that they have the votes.
After this 6-week break, there seemed to be a change in the way the impeachment court was behaving towards the defense lawyers. Did you notice that, or is that? It seemed like the Senate President Juan Ponce Enrile was challenging Cuevas, the lead defense counsel, head-on in a way that he never did before. What does this show? Could it mean anything?
Not well, for us who do a lot of trials, not really, because when you start the trial, the focus is on the prosecution. So even the judge, the tendency of the judge will be to put some form of order on what the prosecutor is doing. Now that the ball is on the other court and it's with the defense, you could have expect the same kind of treatment from the Senate President.
Well, it also seemed like everyone wanted to get the trial done as soon as possible. I mean, sources told us there was a date of May 31, get it done or not. I will throw you, some questions are coming in from social media, so let me throw you a question from @EERo. This is huge and broad, but actually extremely relevant for us. What can be done to save the justice system, which you just described?
There's a lot of things that can be done, but it has to be taken from a structural approach. We have so many flaws in our system. Number one, of course, flaw that we have is the delay. We just cannot have a legal system which takes too long to resolve cases. That's one. Second is, we've been applying rules that are not meant for our system. They are rules that came from America, designed for a jury. We've been using rules for a jury for the last 100 years, but we don't have a jury. I think it's about time that the Philippine bar start thinking about ways to carry out our own rules for our own system.
Why is that? Why hasn't it been revamped?
Part of it, I think, is our colonial past and the comfort that, well, even our lawyers were trained in that same tradition. So for many of us, the adversarial system, the way the American legal system works, is the way it's supposed to be. But now, over time, we've come to realize that there are other systems that work perhaps even better than the adversarial system.
What about corruption in the judiciary?
Impunity is probably the biggest problem that we have. And impunity for me it's the opposite. It's the dark side of accountability. For as long as you have impunity, it's impossible to enforce accountability. How do we address impunity? I think we have to make sure that the witnesses can testify, they can preserve their testimony, that the court proceedings are streamlined, and that everyone from the Supreme Court down will change their attitude. What I haven't seen with this court and even with the previous courts is a really total willingness to accept that our system is dying and that we have to do something about it now.
The impeachment itself, if Corona is acquitted, does it help, does it hinder?
I think it will hinder. I think it will just take us back to a situation that's even worse than the situation now. Because if he remains as Chief Justice in the first place, I don't know that there will be the same amount of respect that
Can he be
people will give
effective
him.
after this
I don't
process?
think he will be effective. And if ever cases are decided by the Supreme Court that are against people he were perceived to be his enemies, then everyone will say, oh, ang ginawa lang niya yan para bumawi.
And then again, so it may be that he can't function as a Chief Justice. What are the other repercussions for not just the judiciary, but also our political system?
Well, if he's acquitted and he continues as Chief Justice, then you cannot expect any kind of transparency from the judiciary. The judiciary is going to consolidate and say, you didn't make it with the Chief Justice, so why are we going to show you our assets and liabilities?
I'll focus on the two key witnesses in the next week, we hope, the Ombudsman and Corona. What do you think the focus should be in the testimony of each one?
The focus of Justice Morales' testimony, I think, is going really to be on the evidence that she has. That's the basis for her order to answer the Chief Justice. For the Chief Justice, it's going to be everything, really. And it's not only going to be what he says, but how he appears, how he projects himself to the public, and what evidence is he going to come out with.
A question from @Juanawana. I asked you one of it already, but what will be the effect on the judiciary if CJ Corona is convicted, which you answered, if is acquitted or convicted? So you answered the acquitted. What would happen?
Well, if he's convicted, that would be an excellent time to start working on the judiciary. And it's not just the people within the judiciary, but the bar and the public at large that should be concerned with that. I don't think we can have any real kind of economic development or any other kind of real improvements in the country until we fix up the legal system. We can't even attract foreign investors to the country until we can say that we can resolve legal disputes in a good way.
This is an interesting question from @VN Saint. Which verdict will do more harm than good?
I think an acquittal will do more harm than good.
Can it be contained?
Yes.
Politically, what impact will that have on President Aquino?
It's different because you're talking of a Chief Justice and not a Chief Executive. The political, fallout, I don't think it's going to be that much.
But will that? What about the erosion of President Aquino's political capital?
That will happen, and that will probably affect somewhat at least the coming elections next year.
For 2013. A related question from @StripedOrchid. If Corona is nailed, what about Corona's allies in the Supreme Court? Is that a stumbling block for progress? We know what side he's coming from, or he or she is coming from.
Yes, there will still be issues with respect to the other justices, but once the Chief Justice, if assuming that he is convicted, I think it would be much harder for the other justices to, continue carrying on their other interests.
What do you think? And again, you're very familiar with the Supreme Court, but this is really the Supreme Court being torn apart very publicly in a way that has never happened in this country before. What is happening inside the halls?
Oh, from what I hear, a lot is happening there that has never happened before. Some justices don't even speak to each other. Yes, I heard that it's gotten that bad. And even among the employees in the court, there are certain factions where if you're identified with one camp, the other camp looks at you as an enemy.
And the camps are the way it's been portrayed by
I think so,
the Chief
yeah.
Justice.
It's
a Carpio camp and
I understand there are several factions, not just two. That's really one of the sad things. But in one sense, I am happy that finally the public, we've opened up the judiciary because it's about time the public starts thinking about it and realizing that this is one of the things we've been blind to. One of the biggest problems we have that we refuse to face, and I think it's about time we face it.
If again we have an acquittal, and the president's power essentially is going to be eroded, what will happen walking into 2013, both for the judicial process, for the judiciary and the executive?
Well, for the judiciary, he will still have his control over the appointment process in the judiciary. Of course, as far as the Supreme Court is concerned, he doesn't have many vacancies that he'll be able to fill. But by and large, I think it will pass, whatever effects that might be adverse to the president. As far as the executive, though, in the political arena, it could give rise to a lot of unpredictability in the coming elections.
And that actually this will move forward. This week coming up is going to be so crucial. What are the dangers ahead? Are there any pitfalls that both sides should stay away from?
One of the things I'm afraid of is if the defense will run to the Supreme Court again and get a restraining order. Because if they do that, it's going to put the two branches in direct confrontation.
What will happen?
And this time, it may really come to a head.
How can that be resolved?
Difficult. It's very difficult to predict. It may reach a point where one side will simply have to back down.
Does Chief Justice Corona, from what you've seen of it, he's really stayed to fight the fight, protesting his innocence in this. Has he made the right decisions?
It's very difficult for me to judge that. Let's just say that if I were in his shoes, I probably wouldn't be there anymore. I would have resigned.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Your last thoughts, Chel, as we move forward. It is going to be a critical week next week, and it seems like both sides want to see it wrapped up, want to see the impeachment trial wrap up soon. Everyone is watching. Your last thoughts?
Well, I'm looking to the future. I think that even after this impeachment trial is over, the Senate and the House have to figure out how do we do this in the future. Because there was so much money and so much time was spent on this trial, which to me could have been saved. If there had just been a pre-trial in the beginning of all the proceedings, the Senate could have determined how many witnesses, how many documents, from both sides, they could have imposed time limits and said, okay, we finish by April. And they could have done it if they had planned it well enough ahead of time.
Well, it seemed among the lessons learned was that the House itself should have conducted public hearings so that they were better prepared.
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much for spending time with us. Jose Manuel Diokno, the Dean of the De La Salle Law School with us. Thank you very much for joining us on Talk Thursday. I'm Maria Ressa. See you soon.
I'll send you a copy.